Please stand for the reading of the gospel. Now, the Holy Gospel for today comes from John in the 10th chapter. Now, Jesus was teaching, and he said, "I'm the good shepherd. Now, the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, on the other hand, who's not the shepherd, does not own the sheep. He sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because the hired hand doesn't care for the sheep. I'm the good shepherd," said Jesus. "I know my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that don't belong to this fold. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I've received this command from my Father." Now this is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Would you please be seated? How many of you remember Garrison Keillor? I know he's been off the track a little bit for a while, but boy, his stories are still funny. He told the story of about how pies and following Jesus is really similar. And he told this story. He said a farmer needed to get his tractor into the field, but he found out every time he headed out to the field that something else was broke. So he'd have to run into town, he'd get some parts, bring it back, fix the tractor. Sometimes having to drag it back into the shed where all the tools were. Well, this went on all day. And about 10:30 that night, he drug himself up through the darkness up to the house, and not wanting to wake up Betsy, his wife, he kind of crumpled into the bed in the extra bedroom where one of the kids used to be. Now, after a short night's sleep, he rose, and boy, he could feel it. You ever have one of those days? You just can't get out of bed. I mean, the back aches and the knees, and he's just hurting away. But he took a good sniff in the air, and he smelled it. That unmistakable aroma of a fresh pie. He thought to himself, "Oh, Betsy, you are a saint. She's made me a pie." Oh, he went and get the Advil as quick as he could to get himself, and he got changed and showered up, and he skipped shaving because that pie was calling his name. And he did that old hobble down the steps. You know, some about how that feels. You don't really kind of walk down the steps, but you still don't want to sit down on your rump and slide, but it's close. Every muscle's hurting, but he's going to get to that pie. He wonders, is it apple? Is it cherry? Could it be his favorite? Did she put the lattice on top because he really liked the lattice because she knew how to put that crispy sugar on top of it? Well, he went into the kitchen, and there it was, his prize. It was a fresh Georgia peach pie. It was sitting there on its altar, you know, the cooling rack, calling his name. So he pulled the chair out away from the table. He went and got himself a plate, and then he went back and got a second plate. because Betsy's going to want one of these. Reached in the drawer and took out 2 forks and a little spatula, special pie cutting knife. And with a lot of eager anticipation and saliva, just really filling his mouth up. Put the spatula in one hand, and almost as he's getting it to the edge, where that pie is, and opening it up, he heard the loving voice of his wife call to him. "Don't you dare cut into that pie, it's for the funeral." I'm pretty sure that many of us treat our faith kind of like a funeral pie. It only comes in handy at the end. Now, our readings for today talk about the Good Shepherd, and I was trying to tie it together with a dog, and I don't know, Jesus could pull these things off, the rest of us can't, because we're still talking about it. But overall, he wants us to learn about what it means to follow him. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever discovered pastors suddenly become experts on sheep at least one Sunday a year? We may not have ever walked in a pasture with one, and we certainly never walked into a pile of dung, but we become experts. I don't know much about sheep. I do understand what Jesus was trying to get to. I invite you this morning and later today to look at these texts. This is one of the few Sundays of the year, of 3-year cycle, in which all 4 of them tie in. And Glenn, thank you for reading. Because they help us to think about what does it mean to follow Jesus. Now later on, I invite you to read them through and just ponder. Just ponder what might be in there that you can benefit. Don't try to slice the whole thing up. Just take one little piece. Just think about it a little bit. Now, one word that you hear me use over and over again at St. Mark is the word disciple. It appears constantly in our communications. I preach, teach about it, and I hope that more and more as a community we live it. A disciple of Jesus is someone who learns from Jesus and they follow him. They walk in his footsteps. That's how rabbis were taught in the ancient days. They simply followed the rabbi. They learned from their teachings. Then later on, they would have followers who would also learn from them. Now, in this reading from John, Jesus is teaching a group of people about what it means to be a disciple, what it means to follow him. Jesus believes it's worth something to follow him. Now, this is where the story gets confusing, and I got to back up. You see, it might be confusing in the days after Easter to be reading a story that's way back at the beginning of his ministry. It took well past before the resurrection and Holy Week. But when we read this text, we need to remember that Jesus is in the middle of some of his most volatile and important engagements with the religious community. But most important, he's teaching a lesson that reaches across all of his lessons. Now, I'm sure that some of Jesus' followers are nearby. They're in a room or maybe a field, who knows? As usual, the disciples are probably behind or beside him. And he's talking to a bunch of the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were the most influential and the largest religious political group of their day. they usually won the arguments. They're definitely the ones that worked to put Jesus away in the end. Now, what Jesus is about to teach them is that it's worth to follow him. However, they're really invested in the ways that they followed of the people that were before them. So why would they stop being disciples of this long tradition, this Pharisaic tradition is the way it's said, to follow this rabbi, itinerant rabbi? Jesus says, I've got something worth listening to. Now, before getting too judgmental over the Pharisees, we need to remember that it's challenging for them because they've been walking and following and doing things this one way. And now Jesus is saying, no, follow me. And just as it's difficult or maybe impossible for them to follow Jesus, what about us? I mean, we do that, don't we? Don't you dare tell me, Pastor, that Jesus was anything but the Jesus I learned about before. Now, I grew up in the 60s as a little kid, and so do you all remember the flannel board Jesus? Oh, that Jesus was nice looking. It's kind of fluffy and had all sorts of images. Jesus I learned about was, for lack of better, he's cuddly. He's like a favorite uncle. Wouldn't harm a fly. Today, there's Jesus often comes off kind of fluffy, doesn't he? He's our best friend who's always there with us and would never challenge us, only comfort us, only make us feel better. Comes up and pats us on the head and says, now, everything's all right. I'm sure Jesus does that quite a bit, especially when life's rough. But then there's all the efforts to kind of take the edges, the rough stuff off of Jesus and make him like us, okay? You got the hipster Jesus. I think there's a picture. There he is. That's the hipster Jesus. You got Jesus who teaches the best of all of us, all religions. You have the most inclusive Jesus. You have the Jesus that's anti-establishment. Meditates like Buddha. And then you got a couple other Jesuses up there. The middle one on the top line is from the 1920s and 30s. Bottom right is right in mainstream today. And even though images may or may not contain bits and pieces of who Jesus is, those images can limit our ability to see what Jesus has to teach us today. One of the bits of wisdom and understanding who Jesus was is to know that it's not in our likeness or sameness that we'll find the power of what Jesus has to teach us. It will be in the otherness of Jesus. Will be in the discovery of how Jesus is unlike us in his thoughts and teachings. It's in that place that we'll discover what it means to follow Jesus. Jesus' teachings in this reading is about that otherness. How Jesus is unlike any other shepherd. In order to protect us and guide us in all places, we need to follow it and learn. That unlike other shepherds who go off and leave their people when they don't quite fit into the mold they've got, this one won't leave you. This Jesus will follow you to the ends of the earth, no matter what. Now, the next challenge we have in the Scripture is reading it, is that the Gospel of John uses so much symbolism and overarching what are called mega themes, it's almost impossible to understand at times. Do you ever find that? Jesus is the Word, and the Word was in the beginning. Jesus is the light. Jesus is like the salt. Jesus is like a shepherd. Sort of like the gate, or the gatekeeper. Which one was he? Was he in that vineyard story? John throws all of them at the listener. And so John, you got all these themes, these images. And he has what's called a mega theme. He likes to use mega themes. Something that Jesus teaches over and over. And what this text is primarily about is about relationship. Our relationship with a living God. You've thought about that? You use that language? I mean, what does it mean to be in relationship with Jesus? What does it mean to follow him? What does it mean to really hear it and then dare to try using it in public? In this teaching, Jesus is trying to help these Pharisees and his friends understand what it means to be in relationship with him. So he used the image of the good shepherd and sheep. People that will follow him. Now he tells them, there's no other shepherd like me. It's a life-giving relationship when you walk with me. And that's what Jesus is teaching. That's all of his teachings. We spend so much time thinking, okay, now at the end, I've got to believe this, this, and this, and maybe God will take me to heaven for that. Jesus' teaching is about the here and now and how we live out with each other. But we also need to think about the word relationship, because a lot of times it's Jesus okay, but on my terms. Jesus, don't you dare question me about my public opinions. Jesus, don't you challenge me on my political party, my club, what I believe, what I don't believe. Don't you dare challenge me, Jesus, on other religions. Of course, I'm in the Jesus club. But what does that mean? American culture, we think about my relationship as if it's a noun, it's something to possess and control. But in John, relationship is something that's alive. It's dynamic, it's ever-changing. It's something that could ask for our attention. That's why in John he uses the word abiding. That's a great word. You've thought about that word? Abide in me, and I'll abide in you. There's a going out and a coming in with the idea of the shepherd. There's a going out, abiding in Jesus, and then coming back to Jesus. It's a motion of our lives. This abiding means that we come to Jesus, and then we go out into the world and we come back, but he also goes with us. Some of you go, okay, Dave, this abiding stuff, but how do you do it? It's okay for you. You get to wear the plastic thing around your neck and wear the funny dress. I work with real people, Dave. Let's get real. Well, first thing you can do is what you're doing right now. You're spending time with other believers. You're singing the songs. You hear the gospel read. You experience something together. You hear the gospel, the lessons read. You get challenged, I hope. And then you get sent out into the world. The second way to abide in Jesus is your quiet time. I know some of you, it's hard to get quiet time. But that quiet time, that where you maybe take this with you, the bulletin, and you underline just a little bit, just a little piece. You need to get the whole pie, just a little piece. Just ponder what that can mean to you. What it can be about. And maybe it's in a book you read, a daily devotional. Lots of ways to do that. The third way is found in community with others outside of the sanctuary, in faith-filled relationships. You know, I see it happen with friends with food. I see people coming together, all from all parts of town, and to pack food and laugh, deliver food, help each other when we fall down. Surprise people with food. It's just one of a number of ways. Gather in Sunday school, gather at confirmation, gather in a small group like the women's group I saw earlier. It's about life together and living that out. We don't have to wait till the end of our lives to benefit from following Jesus. In the last parish I served, we had up to 3 or 4 pastors at one time. And so at 7:15 in the morning, we'd have prayer together. And we had one organist. His name was Lynn Nielsen. Lynn had a long battle with cancer. It was several years that this battle was going on before he finally told me. And every Sunday morning, he'd pray the same thing, that God would be with us. Well, Lynn was a member of a larger parish in the town. We had 2 real large churches. But he chose to stick around with us, and I would go to the hospital and visit him. I'd visit him at home. One Saturday, it was, I got the message late that he was at the hospital, and cancer had advanced quite a bit. I couldn't get there. I had 3 services to do in the morning. We had a meal to do, and then we were saying goodbye to a long-term interim. I finally got over there to Lynn's hospital. And I don't know about you, but when you get ready to go into the hospital room of somebody that's, terminal, is close to the end, I kind of peer around the door, okay? I just want to make sure that I'm not interrupting something that's very personal. I can come back, but for family members, that may be the only time. So I looked in the door, and before I could even decide what I was going to do, Lynn says, come on in, Dave. Come on in, my friend, sit here with me. And I had me sit on the bed right beside him. I sat down, and nurse had taken out his IVs, just changed his bag. And his family's gathered there with him, and his wife and their daughter and a friend. So we held hands, and after talking and telling stories for a little bit, and they did laugh. Lynn kept reminding me of all the foibles of leading worship and being the organist, trying to follow my lead. He said, let's pray, Dave. You know how. You start. I'll finish it. This is a guy on his deathbed. So I started to pray that God would be with him in this time and with his family, and God would abide with them. And then it was family time, and they all prayed, and lots of tears, and the Kleenex came out, and using the bed sheets to wipe our eyes off, Then it's Lynn's turn. Lynn didn't change his prayer at all. It's the same prayer that he used with me for 6 or 7 years before. It's the same prayer that he used with the senior pastor and associate that was before me for 13 years, because he told me same thing. I don't know how many pastors before. You know, a day later, Lynn was gone. Last prayer he shared was this text. For God to abide with us and for us to abide with God. That's what this prayer invites us to do. Not wait to have the 23rd Psalm read at your funeral, but start living it right now.